We discussed earlier how to measure GDP under the expenditure approach, and we also discussed the four components in GDP. Now, do we get real GDP figures? Nominal GDP is GDP measured in current prices, okay, and it's unadjusted for inflation. While real GDP is GDP adjusted for any price changes that we have happened in the economy, that GDP is corrected for inflation. So real GDP is adjusted for inflation to reflect the changes in the output. Okay, now price in an economy do not stay the same, right? Over time, the price level changes. Value that increase or decrease with the price level are called nominal value, and it is measured in current or market price. While real value are adjusted for price changes, that is, they are calculated as though price did not change from the base year. Now let's look at this exercise to make it clear. Consider a simple economy that produces two goods, apples and oranges. The following table shows the price and quantity of the goods over a 2-year period. So we have year 1 and we have year 2. Now we need to use the information to calculate nominal and real GDP. Now remember, nominal GDP measured in price of the current year, okay? While real GDP measured price of the base year or constant dollar. First, we want to calculate nominal GDP for both years. As I said, nominal GDP is just GDP measured in price of the current year. So let's calculate nominal GDP for year 1. For year 1, you take the output of that year, which is 50 for apples and 100 for orange, and you multiply that by their respective price and sum those two values together for year 1. So the nominal value GDP in year 1 is going to be the price of apple, which is $1, multiplied by 50 by quantity, so we get the total expenditure of $50, okay, $50 for the apples, and then we are going to add to that the total expenditure of oranges, which is equal to $80, okay, so basically 100 multiplied by 0.8. So the total nominal GDP for year 1 is 130, right? So 130 is the total GDP for nominal GDP for year 1. So 50 plus 80 equal to 130. Okay, so in year 2 we do the similar thing. We take the price of year 2 and multiply it by the output of apples and oranges in year 2. So again, 80 multiplied by 1.25, and then 120 for oranges multiplied by $1.60, which is equal to 292. Okay. So this is the real GDP, this is the nominal GDP for year 1, and this is nominal GDP for year 2. So we are done from first requirement. The second requirement is to calculate the nominal GDP percentage increase in year 2. Okay, so now in order to calculate the change, we need to calculate the percentage changes in nominal GDP, which is equal to change in the nominal GDP divided by the base year, okay, and multiplied by 100. So in this case, we are going to calculate the changes. So basically 992 minus 130, okay. So this is the change in nominal value value. So GDP year 2 deducted from GDP year 1, and divided by the base year, which is 130. Okay, in order to calculate the changes, and then we multiply it by 100. So the answer is 124%. Okay, so we are done from the second requirement. Okay, now we need to calculate the real GDP for year 2 using year 1 as a base year. Now, always in a question, when they ask us to calculate the real GDP, they will define which is the base year. Okay? Now, real GDP use a price from the base year. And in this question, the base year is year 1. So when we calculate the real GDP, we are going to use the base year price for year 1. Right? Let me just clean it down. Okay, so in this question, the price that we are going to use as a base year is year 1. It means that we are going to use $1 for apple and $0.8 for for the orange. Okay, so when we calculate the real GDP, we are going to use the base year price for year 1, and in this case, we are going to use $1 for the price of apple and $0.8 for the price of orange. Now, to calculate the real GDP for year 1, again, we need to calculate for year 1 and year 2, okay? Now, to calculate real GDP for year 1, we are using year 1 as a base year already. So here, it should no surprise that real GDP and nominal GDP will be the same in the base year. That will always be the case, okay? So now the real GDP for year 1 is basically the same. We multiply 50 by $1 and 100 by 0.8. Okay, so the base year, so the real GDP and nominal GDP for year 1 is always going to be the same. Okay, which is equal to 130. Now, for year 2, we are going to take the base price for year 1 and multiply that by the quantity in year that are looking to calculate the real GDP. So we are going to take the price for year 1 by the quantity of year 2, right? So in year 1, the base price of apple is $1, as we said, and $0.8 for oranges, and multiply it by the output in year 2, which is 80 for apples and 120 for orange. So the total real GDP for year 2 is 176. Okay. So the base year, it means that we are going to take the price at that year. So in year 1, the base year is already year 1, right? So we multiply the quantity of year 1 times the price for year 1. So that's why the answer will be the same as the nominal GDP for year 1. Now, when we calculate for year 2, we said that the base year is year 1. So we are going to take the price of year 1, but the quantity of year 2. Okay. So we are done from second requirement. We are done from third requirement. Now the fourth requirement is the same as second requirement. So we calculate the increase in GDP. So in order to calculate the changes, we need GDP for year 1 and GDP for year 2. So as we said, GDP for year 1, real GDP for year 1 is 130. And real GDP for year 2 is $176. Okay, so the changes, it is going to be 35.4%. Now let's look at the answer. So we calculated the nominal GDP for year 1 and for year 2. Okay, which is basically the price multiplied by the quantity of year 1 and price and multiplied by quantity for year 2. And we said in order to calculate the percentage or the changes, We need GDP for year 1 and GDP for year 2. So we deduct GDP from year 1, GDP year 1 from GDP year 2 and divide it by the GDP year 1, and we multiply it by the 100 because we need a percentage change. Okay. In year 2, we calculated real GDP for year 1 and real GDP for year 2. And as I said, that real GDP for year 1 is going to be equal to nominal GDP for year 1. Why? Because the price and quantity will be the same since the base year is year 1. But real GDP for year 2, we took the price of year 1 multiplied by the quantity or the output of year 2, and the same we calculate the changes in real GDP, which is basically 179 minus 130 divided by 130. Okay. Nominal GDP versus real GDP. So nominal GDP is GDP measured in current dollar, which means at current market price, or the current price we pay for things. Okay, market price. Nominal GDP includes all the components of GDP valued at their current price. When a variable is measured in current dollars, it is described in nominal terms. Okay, while real GDP is the value of final goods and services produced in a given year, okay, when valued at constant price, okay, so at base year, so it will always have a constant price. The quantity will change, depends on the year that we produce, but at constant price. And when we say constant price, we mean the base year. So we are always going to take the price of the base year. So you will find out that you are going to have the same price, but with different quantity. Now let's look at this example. We have three types of product. We have A and B and C. Okay. And in column 1 and 2, we have quantity for year 1 and quantity for year 2. And the same in column 3 and 4, but the price. So price in year 1 and price in year 2. Okay. Now we need to calculate from column 5 to column 8. Now in column 5, we need to calculate the GDP in year 1 and year 1 price. Okay, so GDP in year 1, which means quantity in year 1, okay, and year 1 price. So price in year 1. Okay, so basically we are calculating the nominal GDP in year 1 because the price and the quantity is in the same year. So we are calculating nominal GDP in year 1. So it is basically 6 multiplied by 0.5, 7 multiplied by 0.3, 10 multiplied by 0.7, and a total of $12.1. So this is our nominal GDP in year 1. Now in column 6, we need to calculate GDP in year 2, so quantity of year 2, and year 1 price, and in P1 price. So here we are calculating the real GDP, okay? And the base year is year 1. Why? Because we are using P1, which is price in year 1, okay? So basically it's 11 multiplied by 0.5, 4 multiplied by 0.3, 12 multiplied by 0.7, and the total of $15.1. So here we are calculating real GDP and the base year was year 1. Now in column 7, we need to calculate GDP in year 1, so quantity year 1, okay, and year 2 price. So here is the way around. The base year is year 2. Why? Because we are calculating the price based on year 2, okay? And in column 8, GDP in year 2 and year 2 prices, okay? So P2 multiplied by Q2, and this is the nominal GDP in year 2 because we are taking the price and quantity of the same year. Now let's look at this example. Here we have component of GDP in 2002 under the expenditure approach. Okay, so as I explained earlier, the four main components of GDP are personal consumption expenditure, gross private domestic investment, government consumption, and net exports. Okay, now under the personal consumption expenditure, we have durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. Okay, so the good category includes two subcategories. Consumer durable goods are long-lasting items such as cars and washing machine, while non-durable goods are items that household or consumer use quickly, okay, like groceries and clothing. And an example of service are haircut, car repair, and so on. Gross private domestic investment, we already discussed the three categories: non-residential, residential, and change in business inventories. Then we have government consumptions, we explained that earlier, and net exports, which is basically exports minus imports. Okay, now these four components added up to the GDP in 2002. Okay, so finding out the total of each component in order to have the total GDP. So we need to find out the total of C, the total of I, and the total of G, and the total of net export in order to have the total of GDP. And we did that earlier. Okay, the second column is a percentage of GDP. Percentage of GDP shows how much each category contributes to the total GDP. So let's take, for example, personal consumption expenditure is equal to 7,303. Okay, so we divide this amount, we divide it by the total of GDP, which is 10,446. Okay, and then we have 69.9% as a percentage of GDP. So if you notice that the household final consumption expenditure is typically the largest component of final use of GDP, which represents 69.9% of total GDP. Okay, and you can calculate the same for the remaining. So basically you take the total of each category and you divide it by the total GDP in order to calculate the percentage of GDP. Here we have a short exercise. Let's test our knowledge by solving this exercise. So we need to calculate the nominal GDP for 2002 and 2003. Okay, and we have two types of products, balls and bats. Okay, and we have quantity and price for each product. Now let's calculate nominal GDP for 2002. Okay, now the expenditure in balls equal to 100 quantity multiplied by $1 price. Okay, so the total expenditure is $100, and the same can be applied on bats. 20 multiplied by $5, which is equal to $100. Okay, so we are going to add we are going to add the total expenditure of balls, $100, to the total expenditure of bats of $100. So the total nominal GDP for year 1 is equal to 200. Okay, in 2003 the total expenditure on balls is $80, which is 160 multiplied by $0.5, and the expenditure on bats equal to 495, which is 22 multiplied by 22.5 dollars. Okay, so the total nominal GDP for year 2 is 575. Now, what is the nominal GDP growth rate? So in order to calculate the growth rate, we need the nominal GDP for year 1 and year 2, which we already calculated. We already calculated the nominal GDP for 2002 and 2003. Okay, in 2002 the total nominal GDP is 200, And in 2003, the total nominal GDP is 575. Now the question is to calculate the GDP growth. Now you know, in order to calculate the growth, we need the old and the new nominal GDP. Okay, so basically it's 575, the new GDP, minus 200, the old one, divided by the 200. Okay, so the answer is 187.5%. Now we need to calculate real GDP for 2003 using 2002 as the base year. So here they defined which year is the base year, which is 2002. So we are going to use the price of 2002, okay, in order to calculate our GDP, because 2002 is the base year. Okay, and then calculate the real GDP growth rate. Now let's calculate real GDP for 2003 using 2002 as the base year. Okay, so now we know that 2002 is our base year, so we are going to use the price of 2002. So for balls it's $1 and for bats is $5. Okay, so now the expenditure on balls in 2003 valued at 2002 price is 160. So 160 for balls multiplied by $1. Okay, and expenditure on bats in 2003 valued at 2002 price is 110. So 22 bats multiplied by $5. So the real GDP in 2003 is 270. 160 plus 110. Okay. Now, in order to calculate real GDP growth, we need to calculate GDP for 2002 and 2003. We already calculated the 2003 real GDP. Okay. Now, as you know, that real GDP and nominal GDP will be the same in the base year. Okay, that will always be the case. Okay, so as we said that the base year is 2002, so 100 multiplied by 1 plus 20 multiplied by $5. So we are going to have 200 real GDP in 2002, which is similar, which is equal to the nominal GDP in 2002. Okay, and we explain why is that, because the base year is 2002, so we are going to have the same quantity and the same price for the same year. Okay, so here we, in order to calculate the GDP, we need to calculate the change. So 270 minus 200 divided by the 200, which is equal to 35% in real GDP growth.